Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Studio Talk. I'm Barry Johns. I'm working on a video series right now. This is the second video in that series where I talk about incorporating analog hardware into a workflow where maybe you've probably been strictly in the box to this point, but yet you see all this gear and you're curious and you want to check it out and you're not sure really how to go about it or what to invest in, what to look for, what not to look for. So that's what this video series is about. Now, the last video really went into depth, and yes, it's a little bit of a long video, but it's better to watch it unless you're 1,000% sure you've got it down. Go back and watch that video. It'll be in the description down below. And the first video was about really understanding hardware inserts, which is how you get your signal out of your computer, back out into your interface, and then back out to analog gear, and then back in. So that's done via what's called a hardware insert. So go back and watch that video. I'll put a link down below under the description where you can go back and watch that if you haven't watched it yet. That said, if you already know how to do those things and you feel confident you've got that down, you can start with this video, all right? And so before I get started, I got to get this out of the way. Do me a favor. I put a lot of work and a lot of effort into doing these videos for you folks, and I generally do it honestly to help you, all right? And so if you appreciate what I do for you and the content that I put out, all I ask is just take a second and hit that subscribe button, like the video, and then hit the notification bell or any combination of that makes you happy. You know, it's like anything else in life. To continue to grow anything requires a kind of a commitment. So I'm committed to you. I'm just asking that maybe if you feel like it, you share that back with me. Okay, let's get that crap out of the way and let's move on to this discussion. All right. All right. So, you know, I think when you look at various pieces of analog gear, and when we say analog, when I say analog hardware, what I'm really talking about is outboard. In other words, dedicated hardware analog devices that fit like either a compressor, an EQ, or a mic preamp, or a combination of all of those, because sometimes you can get channel strips that have a combination of all of those, right? And so, or a combination of two. So that's really what I'm talking about. Not really specialty things and that type of stuff. That's not what the purpose of this is about. It's about, okay, I'm ready to take the plunge. I kind of need some advice and some guidance on what to consider, okay, and maybe what products to buy and why I should be compelled to them, and then or why maybe I should stay away from them. So let's kind of break this down into understanding a few things. Most affordable analog hardware are typically clones of more famous pieces of gear. As an example, a Universal Audio or URI back in the day, an 1176 compressor, probably without a doubt, is the most widely used compressor throughout history, right? It's not the only one, but it's definitely the most widely used. Next up would be a very popular LA2A, which was also by Universal Audio. And that primarily is great for vocals, for bass, you know, kind of sources like that, whereas an 1176 is going to be killer on drums and other instruments, and also great on voice and also great on bass. You know, there really is incredibly universal is an 1176. And so when it comes to equalization, typically what you see cloned in EQ in these things, predominantly, everybody's kind of chasing the Neve thing. If you've never watched a Sound City movie or documentary or rockumentary, whatever you want to call it, that David Grohl did, you should go out and watch that. And I think you can walk away some finer appreciation of not only the analog workflow, but people's experience, their passion with it, but also the history of Neve, especially if it relates to that, because it's pretty freaking cool. At least I think so. So you got Neve clones, right? Which are probably the most widely used microphone preamp throughout the 70s, okay? And then you've got API. And API is another manufacturer of killer gear. So a lot of their gear is emulated, whether it's their mic preamps, compressors, or EQ. They make phenomenal gear. But like anything else, the, API and Neve and universal audio, those are on the higher end of cost to get into this. So only reason I'm bringing those up is just so you know that those are really the main ones. Of course, there are others on the fringe, and this is not meant to be an exhaustive coverage of it. But those are basically the two that are probably the most appreciated and widely available in the more economical forefront of buying hardware and incorporating that into your workflow. So let's talk about some of the various brands. But I guess I should say, before I get into the brands, here's one thing that is just a hard, cold reality. I personally don't have much of a problem with it, but a lot of people can't seem to get past this mentally. But the reality is the majority of this affordable analog gear is made in environments where quality is not the highest. There are key components typically in all of these units that share some very significant commonality with what they're trying to duplicate. But however, your knobs and your potentiometers and your soldering connections and the overall solid feel of the unit, in my experience, and I've used quite a bit of this, they're nowhere near on the level of the type of gear that they're emulating, i.e. Neve, Universal Audio, or API, I'm sorry. They're nowhere near on the level of that. Now, they're not terrible, okay? They're not terrible at all. It's just those premium units, which come at, let's call it, frankly, a premium price. Worth it, but a premium price, all right? And so they're designed to be used day in and day out throughout the entire day, 12, 14 hours a day, turning knobs, adjusting things or whatever, not constantly, but a lot of that high durable work, whereas most of the stuff that we're going to look into, if you're looking into an affordability perspective, it's going to come with some compromises. Again, I don't have a problem with it because I'm not sitting here and turning those dials nonstop, and I've yet to have an issue. The only thing that I have to do somewhat regularly is clean the pots where you get scratchy pots, pentiometers, okay? It's when you're turning your pentiometer, let's say your gain knob or your threshold or whatever, and you're hearing a scratchy sound. Typically, that means you've got dust inside your potentiometer and you've got to get it with detoxing. Spray that down there and get it out. But that's about the only thing that I've ever had to do. Now, I will tell you, let's start getting into brands. So understand that when you invest in it, there's a reason they're able to do it at such an affordable quality. One of those is the actual physical components of the unit. There's also the other of mass production, which with the more expensive stuff, a lot of that stuff is not done in that environment. So attention to detail and quality is higher. But still, let's face it, the overwhelming majority of electronics that we use come from overseas, predominantly China, okay? And so I don't have a problem with it. A lot of people like to get hung up on it. And there was a time when made in the USA crap really meant something, but not so much anymore. So they can certainly make fine gear, especially when you consider what you're paying for it. So now let's kind of talk about some of the brands that make, and I'll share, if I have personal experience with it, I'll share it with you. If I don't, if I've researched and looked at it, I'm going to share with you what I've learned, but please understand, I may or may not have personal experience with a particular piece of gear. Because there's so much out there. So probably the one that is probably the biggest and has grown the most, albeit not the first, okay? One of them that's gone really far with this has been Warm Audio. And I think a lot of people saw what they did, a lot of other businesses, and saw, well, wait a minute, I can do that too. And some of them even say, I can do it better than Warm Audio, and some do. Not to take anything away from Warm Audio, because I've got quite a few pieces of Warm Audio gear here in the studio, and I actually enjoy it. I would trade it for the original in a heartbeat, but hey, I'm getting perfectly fine use out of it right here. I've got gear from all over the range, from entry level to insanely expensive, and everything in between in here. And I'm not a snob when it comes to that stuff. I don't get hooked up on names or stuff like that. I'm all about sound, baby, sound. Okay. So when you look at Warm Audio, they have a wide collection. They are doing clones of the majority of the popular pieces of gear out there that are famous throughout history for being utilized, and they also do a lot of great microphones. Now, I will tell you that the Warm Audio Pultec EQ, the Warm Audio LA2A, and the Warm Audio 1176 do a very, very, very good job for the price. Now, today, they're probably at the little bit of the top end of the spectrum, somewhat to some degree, right? And so I would have zero qualms whatsoever recommending Warm Audio. Now, I may pick some others over that, and I'll get to that here in a minute. But Warm Audio, don't be afraid of it. Jump in. The water's just fine, especially if you're just getting into this. Once you learn to appreciate the subtle difference of this stuff, then and then maybe you'll consider upgrading to a little bit more expensive piece to maybe take it up just that tiny bit more. Okay, but what I have found is even the least expensive, lowest quality outboard compressor in my ears, many times, not all the time, but many times will beat the plug-in, and that says a lot. Now, that's not always the case, all right? Now, I've got plenty of videos on my channel demonstrating where I compare plugins to analog gear and that kind of stuff, and certainly there are plenty of times that plugins certainly do a great job and hold their weight, all right? So now you've got, the Warm Audio side. So go in, water's fine, buy whatever you want. You're not likely to have a bad experience, all right? Then you've got Stam Audio, right? Now, Stam Audio makes fantastic gear, right? I use their SSL bus compressor every day here in the studio in a 500 series and love it. If you're curious about that, I've got videos out there demonstrating that. But I'm a big fan of Stam Audio. That said, and Joshua, who runs Stam Audio, will be the first to admit that he went through some stumbling blocks a few years ago that quite honestly really tarnished his reputation. My personal opinion is I think he got into this. He was making such great gear that he got in over his head and really tried to be able to produce the volume he needed to, but there were people placing pre-orders that were on those pre-orders for very, 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 very long time. He is now, from everything I can tell, has gotten past that and openly talks about his mistakes. I have a lot of respect for someone who can admit their mistakes and their faults as long as they learn from them, and I'm confident that he has. So today, as of today, I completely recommend anything from Stam Audio. I think they make great cloned gear for the price. And they make some stuff that goes even to a much higher level that seriously competes with the original, right? He also makes a lot of cloned microphones and things like that too. The only little maybe thing I would say to Joshua is he tends to kind of come out with revision 2 or revision this of a previous gear. And most of us are going to think, why didn't you get that right the first time? Are you just redoing it to sell another piece of gear? I don't think so. Like, for example, he just came out with a new 1176 style that does things the 1176 was never designed to do. And then you see a bunch of people get all wigged out because it's not an 1176. And who cares? It does cool stuff and I'm going to buy one. Okay. But that's irrelevant. All right. So Stam Audio today, my blessing, enjoy. You can buy from that company and you're not going to be dissatisfied once you get used to and learn the gear that you're going to be purchasing. Okay. So let's talk about some of the others out there. Let's talk about some more of the really affordable stuff, and probably the one that probably stands out the most right now amongst, folks getting into this the first time, and that's Klark Teknik. So let's talk about Klark Teknik for a second. Klark Teknik actually, traditionally, is a manufacturer of really high-end and expensive gear. Seems to be a lot of it's for video, post, broadcast, those types of things, a lot of clocking, things like that, distribution, networked audio, voiceover, IP, that kind of stuff. But I think my guess is at some point they probably said, well, these other guys are doing, there's no reason in the world we can't tip our toes into that water and try to get a piece of the pie. And so Here's what I'll tell you about Klark Teknik. You're getting what you pay for. That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. You're getting what you pay for. I have in this studio sitting in here because, quite frankly, they were given to me, and I wouldn't have bought them. But that's only because I've already moved past that stage of where entry level no longer appeals to me. Okay, we all get in our journey at different times, and we evolve, right? And so I'm not judgmental on that. I'm just saying they're not my first choice. And so what I have in here that's Klark Teknik is actually quite a few pieces. I've got their LA2A version. I've got 2 of their Pultec EQs, and I've got their 1176. So let's kind of talk about where in my opinion, this is just my opinion, my ears, my studio, what I hear. Okay. Let's compare the Klark Teknik against the Warm Audio as an example. They're not close. They're flat out not close, and I've got videos out there. Now, that said, you can get some great sounds out of the Klark Teknik stuff. You can. None of them sound like their original clones. The Pultec does not sound like a Pultec. It acts and behaves similarly to a Pultec. The 1176, quite frankly, their KT 1176, not even remotely close to an 1176. And then their LA2A, probably closer, but still not there. Now, they still sound great. Who cares if they sound that close to the original? I really don't care. Now, I encourage you, if you want to consider that, and I think Klark Teknik can be a good option to get into. Just understand you're not going to get resale value out of it. Once you buy, you'll have a hard time even giving it away, and that's any kind of gear in that price range. I don't mean that literally, but the more expensive gear you can buy, especially if you buy used, you can turn around and sell it for what you paid for it a year later, and maybe you're only out the cost of the fees and shipping or whatever. But that's it. You're not losing that much. But when you get into more lower end or lower priced or more affordable things, they simply don't hold their value. And so that's another thing to consider. That's why it's oftentimes better to invest a little bit more. Now, that said, over at GearSpace, which used to be known as Gear Sluts, which is a forum for folks like you and I who really are passionate about this stuff, and there's a massively long thread over there that talks about what people are doing to upgrade and modify their Klark Teknik gear. And a lot of people out there are saying really, really good things about it once you make some of those changes. Now, if you think about it, that's no different than buying, if you're a guitar player, buying an Epiphone Les Paul compared to a Gibson Les Paul Standard, right? They both look the same on the surface for the most part, but the components of everything that make it up are a lot different. You're obviously going to get much higher quality pieces of like saddles and bridges and tuners and potentiometers and all of that stuff, input jacks, toggle switches. The pickups are a higher grade, all the electronics and all the hardware and stuff, as well as the overall construction process, which I would say doesn't have as much to do with it because everything's done on a CNC machine today. But it's kind of like that. A lot of people will buy that and then upgrade the pickups and upgrade the bridge and upgrade the saddle to get it closer to a Gibson Les Paul Standard. Now, I'm not suggesting that you can actually get there, but you can get pretty close. Not exactly, but hey, there's a reason it costs that much more money. So how is that any different with the Klark Teknik? So yeah, you may be going out and changing a few tubes here or there to do that, or maybe replacing a transformer, all stuff that's so simple it's ridiculous. Don't worry about it. You can do it easily. But that's another thing to consider. Now, so now we talked about Klark Teknik. You've got that. Another manufacturer of really affordable, again, this one again falls under, this is more in the Klark Teknik line. But then again, this too is another guy who's known for making really good stuff. And then now he's coming a really reputable high-end stuff, I should say, not good. Well, of course it's good, but high-end reputable stuff. He's doing that, but he's also entering the market into this lower end thing. And I have a couple of his pieces here in the studio. In my 500 series rack over there, I've got the Lindell 500 series, their version 1176. I've also got their version of the Pultec EQ. I use both of those all the time. but I would always pick my Warm Audio over those in a heartbeat. They're kind of go-tos when I don't have anything left. I'll use those, okay? I think they actually do a pretty good job for what you pay for them, right? You can get better, sure, but they don't do a bad job. Now, he just came out with that new 1176 that people are raving about, and I'm dying to get my hands on that just to do a review for the channel because people are talking about it so much. And so that's actually something that there's really a lot of buzz about out there that people are talking about, but yet I haven't experienced it, and that's the fact that you can get such a really great 1176 style compressor for, $300-400. And that's a steal. That is a steal. And so if the hype ends up matching reality, that's something I could certainly encourage. But I don't have any qualms whatsoever if you want to go out and buy some Lindell stuff. Just understand you're getting, again, affordable stuff. So it's not gonna move mountains for you, okay? But it will help you. Okay, I just brain farted, so I had to go look the name of it because I couldn't believe I couldn't remember it. But anyway, here we are. Next up, Golden Age. Golden Age also fits that typical price point of Lindell, however you say it, I don't know. Klark Teknik, and those types of pieces. And so they also make some really, really, really interesting things for an economical price. Now, there are people that swear by Golden Age products, okay, especially some of their compressors. I think they make a bus compressor they do and some other things. A lot of people really swear by them. I used one a very, very long time ago, so I don't really have any upfront memory about it. But Golden Age has a pretty solid reputation for that price point, okay? So that's something you should look at. I think considering all of the price points that we've talked about so far, and if I had to pick somebody, and really what we're talking about is in the sub 1,000 category for most of their products, not all, but most, I would say Warm Audio is a safe bet, okay? Now we're going to go into and talk about some of the ones that I consider elevated above these ones we've been talking about, okay? And I see them elevated above. Probably my favorite clone manufacturer out there today, without question, is Audioscape. Now, they are a small outfit. They're only like 2 hours from right here where I live in Central Florida, and they hand make that stuff over there. From what I understand, he uses a lot of the electronics and the repair technicians and things like that who work at NASA, which is right down the road from where he's at, and they help him build his pieces of gear. And so that's why it's hard to get. You pretty much have to follow their Facebook page, and then every Wednesday and every Saturday, they tell you what they're releasing, and they all sell out in a matter of a minute, not even a minute, right? And so they are wildly popular, but they are made here in the States, and they are not made overseas as of today, all right? So I strongly, strongly recommend Audioscape. Now, their stuff starts out, they have some items, plenty of items in that sub 1,000, right around 1,000. But, they even start moving up into really starting to clone some serious gear that gets you into the over 1,000 price range. But I think it is fan-freaking-tastic. I've got their V3, which is their LA3 clone in the 500 series back there. I use it every freaking day. I love it. I plan on, next time they have 2 Pultec EQs up, I plan on buying 2 of their Pultec EQs, and then getting rid of all the Pultecs getting rid of the Klark Teknik completely. Got to make room for it anyway. I'll hold on to my Warm Audio. And so really, really, really a big fan of them. Now, here's another silent sleeper out there. Silent sleeper. Cappy. Especially if you're going after that API type sound and vibe. I'll be honest with you, I'll pick Cappy over API. Now, if I had them both right there, I'd pick the API. But obviously, the cost of the Cappy compared to the cost of the API, not even close. Now, with Cappy, Okay. It's another one that started out that as a build your own kind of a kit thing. You buy all the pieces of components, they give you the instructions, and you assemble it today. You can still do that. It's still a huge part of their business. However, they will sell them already put together for you. And then you also have, there's quite a few people out there like on Reverb and others who buy the kits, assemble them, and then sell them to you assembled. A lot of them out there. The only thing to watch out for Cappy right here today is you're probably going to have to be patient. I mean, you can check Reverb to find some used stuff or things like that, but these smaller companies have been hit heavily by this chip shortage. And so today they're struggling getting really hardly anything in. So that's something to consider. So if you look into them and maybe they're not quite ready to go into full wide distribution again, then keep it in the back of your mind and go back. I can't recommend that enough. API is killer on drums, bass, electric guitar, anything that's aggressive that you want punch and drive. I freaking love API type gear, and Cappy does a fantastic job of cloning that. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but trying to make it seem just like it, right? However you want to look at it. So Cappy does an amazing job. Now, the next up would be a similar company, and that's called Hairball Audio. Hairball Audio is just like Cappy. They started out as build your own kits. You want to build your own 1176, build it. You want a blue stripe, you want a black face, you want an LA2A, you want mic preamps, Neve, whatever. They've got the kits to sell you. I have to imagine, I haven't looked recently, but they're probably facing the same chip shortages that Cappy is, as an example. But these are things that you can do and really enjoy. I'm going to wrap. First of all, let me help you understand this. I'm not going to touch on every possible piece of gear. There is an overwhelming selection of 500 series types of hardware that are exciting and great and amazing. Sometimes they're hit or miss, but really, really great stuff. So I can't possibly hit on everything. I'm going to talk about the ones that I think most people talk about for more than just one particular piece of gear, right? So I would be remiss if I didn't at least touch on this. Now, I am getting out of the entry-level stage here, okay? But the difference in cost is not that much different, okay? I will tell you my favorite 1176 style compressor that I've ever used, and I've been shooting myself in the foot since the day I sold that thing. I was stupid for doing so. And that's the Purple Audio 1176. Okay, I think it's the MC77 or something like that. I can't remember. But regardless, that thing is phenomenal, and I would take that over a Universal Audio 1176 every day of the week. Next up, if there is one compressor that will solve and handle just about any and everything you throw at it, it's the Distressor. If you only bought one compressor for the rest of your life, save up and buy that one. It doesn't do everything, but it really covers a lot of ground. I mean, a lot of it, right? And so when you consider something like a Distressor or the Purple Audio 1176, those types of things, you're making an investment because both of those items will hold their value. You can't even hardly find the Purple Audio used. That's another indicator of how good it is, right? The Distressor's been around for decades, okay? And it's still hot, and holds its value, all right? So keep that in mind, and the advantage of that is if you come on hard times, all the things that can get in the way of life, and you just got to sell a piece of gear to get through it, and you'll buy it again later on down the road. Items like the Distressor and some of the other things that I've mentioned, and the Purple Audio and a lot of the Audioscape stuff and the Cappy, it's gonna hold its value. It's gonna hold its value. Warm Audio will do an okay job, but not great. Klark Teknik and all the others down below that, they will not hold their value. I'm not saying you need it to, but be realistic about it. That's just the way of life. Is it fair? Is it right? Probably not, but that's just the hard, cold reality of it, okay? So hopefully this gives you some examples of what things to consider, what things to look out for, and that kind of stuff as you're progressing through going down the analog outboard gear thing for the first time, right? It's a journey. Be careful. It's addictive, all right? And oftentimes people buy way more gear than they really need, and that'll be a subject of some other videos coming up. So again, if you're not sure about hardware inserts, go back and watch that video. This one kind of covers what should I consider as far as brands, things like that, price points, what are the things to consider, what do I like, what am I not so big of a fan of. That's what this one's about. The next video coming out, I'm actually going to demonstrate the utilization of some of the pieces in my studio and kind of go through 4 or 5 different examples, how I set from start to finish, how I set up the hardware insert, how I do the I/O assignments, how I get that set up on my interface, how I set gain, gain staging and everything along the way, because you hear a lot of this discussion about gain staging in the digital world. A lot of people say you don't need to. I think that's a load of nonsense. I think that's ridiculous, but it is nowhere near as important in the box situation as it is in the analog world. When you're dealing with nothing but analog gear, gain staging is absolutely vital. Otherwise, you'll get nothing but noise and hiss. Your noise floor will be raised, and it'll sound terrible if you don't have that done. So there's some tricks to getting that right, and we'll be talking about those. So hopefully you guys are finding these video series helpful. But again, like I said in the beginning, if you like the things I talk about, please support the channel. Hit that like, that subscribe, that notification bell, and do me a favor, leave some comments down below. If you've got some questions, I work hard to try to get to all of them. The more time I've been doing this video channel, I've got hundreds of videos out there, so it gets a little bit harder, okay, trying to stay up on that stuff, but I try hard, okay? So until next time, I hope every one of you have a great day.